Hello and welcome to March Honeys. We are excited to bring in the new month with you all with a brand new episode in a couple weeks here. But first and foremost, a brand new Beesness. Last week's range of stories was pretty fascinating. Everything from institutional and lawsuit related news to more announcements. So let's dive into your hand-picked headlines. A few follow-ups to begin with. The first, Brooklyn Museum workers rallied against the layoffs last week ahead of a city council hearing. On February 25th, over 200 current and former Brooklyn Museum workers, as well as other supporters, gathered outside during the invitation-only Chairman's Dinner fundraising event to protest this month's staff layoffs, which impacted nearly 50 full and part-timers. Demonstrators held signs that read things like, quote, "Art workers won't kiss ass," end quote, and quote, "Say Brooklyn Museum, heard you can't read a contract," end quote. The group was organized by two unions representing museum workers, District Council 37 Local 1502 and UAW Local 2110. The Brooklyn Borough President, Antonio Reynosa, showed his support at the rally, calling on the city to cover the museum's deficit in its upcoming budget. Then, February 28th, Brooklyn Museum workers, union reps, and City Council Committee on Civil Service and Labor members formally met regarding the recently announced mass layoffs in a special oversight hearing at City Hall. The hearing was called by the committee to assess the layoffs in light of the institution's financial circumstances and determine whether workers were fairly treated. They encouraged absentee individuals to submit written testimony online as well. A few specific moments from the hearing caught our attention, honeys. The first was when Council Chair Carmen De La Rosa asked Lori Cumbo, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, or DCLA, which provides about 20% of the museum's funding, whether the department requires recipient institutions to provide financial contingency plans to prevent worker reductions. The answer was no. The Brooklyn Museum is technically able to maintain that it is complying with a required 30-day layoff notice period because the layoffs will become effective March 9th, but museum director Ann Pasternak characterized the layoffs as quote-unquote unavoidable in a February 28th letter to De La Rosa, which appeared in the hearing. Said June Lay, Local 1502 secretary and full-time producer at the Brooklyn Museum who testified at the hearing, quote, "Myself and my colleagues were shocked and saddened that the place we loved had eschewed its longtime values for a Doge-esque consolidation of power. Today, it is balancing its budget on the backs of workers who lose their benefits, salaries, pensions, and union membership," end quote. The lead of the Egyptian-British team, which found the tomb of ancient Egyptian King Thutmose II, British archaeologist Piers Litherland, came forward with his belief last week that there is another. His idea contradicts an earlier finding and IDing of a mummy as Thutmose II at the nearby archaeological site Deir al-Bahari, Kachet, in the 19th century, which is currently held at the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo. Litherland instead believes that this second tomb holds the real Thutmose II. Though the mummy at the Cairo Museum was identified as having died at the same age as Thutmose II and was labeled A-N-Re, and King Tut was the only one with an N in his regal name, Keper-en-Re, Litherland says, quote, "There are 23 meters of a pile of man-made layers sitting above a point in the landscape where we believe, and we have other confirmatory evidence, there is a monument concealed beneath," end quote. "We will let you know if he gets the green light to find out." We received word last week that Manhattan's new museum will reopen this fall after over a year with a sweeping 150 artist exhibition filling its over twice as big gallery spaces. The 60,000 square foot, 7-story extension cost $82 million to construct. The exhibition itself is titled New Humans, Memories of the Future, and will explore the ever-shifting relationships between humanity and technological evolution across the 20th and 21st centuries. Although some details have yet to be released, the museum confirmed that the list will include Daria Martin, Felipe Pereno, Wangechi Mutu, Francis Bacon, and Salvador Dali. It was no small headline to see last week that the Guggenheim Museum has laid off 20 workers. The New York Times reported Friday, February 28th, that the Guggenheim has cut 20 jobs, or 7% of its staff, across multiple departments with the exceptions of senior leadership and curators. In all honesty, honeys, this news is not terribly surprising, but it is still concerning. This is the third wave of job cuts at the Guggenheim in only 5 years, with the previous 2 times framing the exit of 30-plus staff members, including 2 deputy directors. The layoffs are not reflecting too well on Mariette Westerman, who took over as director and chief executive in 2024 and who has tried to steady things with modest endowment growth and a trimmed-down schedule, yet ticket prices keep rising. Our sources for today speculate that the museum's continuing to hurt over its losses in the international tourism sector since the pandemic. They also noted that the museum's much-anticipated Guggenheim Abu Dhabi outpost remains in limbo, plagued by delays and controversy. Perhaps taking note of what's been happening with the Brooklyn Museum, the Guggenheim Museum's union has filed a grievance that there was no prior notice and is demanding negotiations on the layoffs affecting 14 union workers associated with Local 2110 United Auto Workers. The chapter's president, Olga Brudastova, told Hyperallergic that these employees were, quote, denied any union representation, end quote, at the meetings regarding the layoffs. Art News writes that while the Guggenheim is undeniably still an architectural icon as a building and a major cultural player as an institution, the recent track record suggests that that is a more precarious state than it ever was. It is struggling to, quote, recapture the blockbuster success of its 2018 Hilma F. Klint exhibition, which drew record crowds, end quote. We heard last week that 2 separate shows on and by artists of African descent have lost funding or been canceled amid the Trump DEI crackdowns. Both were set to go up at the Art Museum of the Americas, which is part of the Organization of American States, with the opening date of March 21st. The museum itself holds a 2,000-plus item collection related to Latin American and Caribbean art, and the Organization of American States, or OAS, is a diplomatic body focusing on human rights, democracy, security, and development in the Western Hemisphere. The first was set to be installed this week. It was a solo exhibition titled Nature's Wild with Andil Gosin, but was canceled earlier in the month. The exhibition was adapted from the artist's 2021 book on art activism and homosexuality in religion titled Nature's Wild, Love, Sex, and Law in the Caribbean. Because there was no stated cause given, it's unclear precisely why the exhibition was canceled, but was reportedly done under the order of the General Secretariat of the OAS. Gosin himself has publicly stated he believes it is because the museum branded it as a, quote, queer show, end quote. Our sources suggest the cancellation may be tied to the Trump administration's updated priorities for U.S. foreign diplomacy, which include, quote, combating genuine enemy propaganda, end quote, as our sources report. But they were unable to tie it fully to that, as funding for Gosin's show came from other sources like artist grants, the World Pride Organization, and the Canadian Permanent Mission to the OAS. A curator at the museum, Cheryl D. Edwards, told Hyperallergic only days later another show of works by African-descendant, Caribbean, and American artists was canceled at the request of the Trump administration, who withdrew funding from the show earmarked by the Biden administration because the former deemed it a DEI program and event. Titled Before the Americas, the show took 4 years to put together and would have included 40 works exploring migration, colonial challenges, and interconnectivity in the African diaspora in the Americas. It included works even by recent Beesness stars, such as Alonzo Davis, founder of one of the first Black-owned contemporary art galleries in the U.S., and Mexican-American sculptor Elizabeth Catlett. The why we care on this one, honeys, should be very obvious. This is 2 shows at a major museum severely affected by one administration out of the 34 total that belong to the OAS. The power imbalance inherent there and the Trump administration's abuse of it is nothing short of horrifying. The artist and gallerist Michelle Taliba, whose painting One from 1979 was part of the group show, told our sources, quote, at a time when institutions of cultural and historical significance are facing systemic dismantling, we are also witnessing the erosion of free expression and artistic freedom, casualties of forces determined to distort narratives and manipulate an uncertain future, end quote. We also heard last week that a Manhattan nonprofit has sued the city to halt the destruction of a social sculpture garden. The nonprofit, which oversees the Elizabeth Street Garden, is suing the city of New York under the argument that its coveted Manhattan public space qualifies for legal arts protection under the Visual Artists' Rights Act, or VARA, of 1990. The garden was created in the late 90s by late gallerist Alan Reaver, who began transforming what was an abandoned lot into a community space, yet the organization was served an eviction notice last October as part of a city plan to develop an affordable housing complex for low-income and LGBTQ+ seniors on the plot. The garden was able to secure a temporary stay of eviction, thereby delaying further legal action until this month. But that notice followed over a decade of disputes with the New York City Housing Authority, which retained ownership of the land because the plot once supported a public school, and it was rented out to Alan Reaver as part of a 1990 month-to-month lease agreement. Son of the founder and current garden director Joseph Reaver filed the suit to block city plans under the claims that the garden should be shielded under 1990 VARA laws, which protect works of, quote, recognized stature, end quote, from being intentionally destroyed during redevelopments. The fight over the Elizabeth Street Garden has drawn support from New York City figures including Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, and Patti Smith. We admit, honeys, this is one of the more complex legal cases we've ever covered, but it's important because of how much it hinges on the question of necessity. The city sees its so-called Haven Green project as necessary to alleviate the neighborhood's affordable housing crisis. Sources say, quote, according to a report by the nonprofit Live On New York released last July, more than 300,000 seniors are on the waiting list for affordable housing, marking a 50% increase since 2016, end quote. Yet Director Reaver told Hyperallergic even back in October that the city's plan was pitting green space against affordable housing in what he called a false choice. He has since proposed the city redistribute the housing funds destined for the Elizabeth Street Garden plot to other sites slated for redevelopment. Furthermore, the garden stated that they have identified alternative sites where they said the city could create 705 units of affordable housing, as opposed to Haven Green's proposed 123 units. We will let you know what happens next. Former Ringling trustees very publicly decried the quote-unquote catastrophic proposal to transfer the museum last week. The proposal, revealed in DeSantis' preliminary $115.6 billion budget for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year, would transfer control of the institution and its over 10,000 item collection to the New College of Florida, or NCF, whose right-wing transformation over the last few years has gained national attention. The Ringling Museum, established in 1927, has been under the oversight of the Florida State University, or FSU, for more than 20 years and is therefore one of the largest university-affiliated art museums in the U.S., is the official state art museum of Florida, with work spanning antiquity to contemporary times. The proposal will be voted on this week by Florida lawmakers in the state's upcoming 60-day legislative session beginning March 4th. If it passes, the NCF would take over the Ringling on August 1st and is expected to uproot FSU's established on-site academic programs in the arts, as well as museum management. It would also potentially put the employment of current FSU faculty and museum workers into limbo. The NCF has been the subject of a right-wing overhaul, really, spearheaded by DeSantis, who appointed a slew of political allies to the school's governing board of trustees in 2023. That led to an ideological hiring spree, which led to the departures of longtime faculty and students in droves, as well as a state audit last year, which revealed multiple financial missteps. In an open letter addressed to Ringling patrons, FSU alumni, and Sarasota community members, a group under the name of Citizens to Protect the Ringling advocated for the museum to stay under FSU's oversight and warned of the dangers of a transfer. Circulating last week, it was signed by 6 former Ringling Foundation chairs and 9 board members and donors, reading in part, quote, the proposal is clearly a waste of taxpayer resources to disrupt a proven Florida State University Ringling partnership that has delivered significant benefits to our students, state, and local community, end quote. It additionally argues the transition could lead to the sale of collection items and museum buildings, risk the Ringling's national accreditation, and put the preservation of the institution at risk. Nancy Parrish, one of the group's members and a former chair at the Ringling, told Hyperallergic that they have received droves of community support to their campaign, and we can only hope that will be enough to sway lawmakers. And now, honeys, realizing that this episode has gotten a little darker than I anticipated, we'll break up the flow a little bit here and talk about a new report which revealed how and where Black collectors have stepped in where institutions haven't. In a piece coinciding with Black History Month and in the light of the presidential attacks on DEI, Architectural Digest recently highlighted how 15 Black collectors are, quote, changing the art world, end quote. One of the most crucial points, in my opinion, that the article emphasizes is to communicate how collection practices can serve as an alternative record of exhibitions and histories. Writes reporter Charlotte Collins, quote, for many Black art collectors, the home doubles as a gallery, not just because our interiors are where we keep our most valued possessions, but as artist and curator Jessica Gaynell Moss explains, historically, in the absence of institutional respect for Black artistry, domestic spaces were some of the only venues available for exhibition. Quote, we weren't allowed to show in museums or galleries as artists, let alone exhibit as collectors who wanted to support Black artists, end quote, she says. Quote, the only places we could see and find each other were in our homes, end all quotes. A fascinating article well worth the read and linked in our source document. Also last week, 3 men were charged with stealing Maurizio Cattelan's golden toilet after newly released footage showed the theft. At the beginning of last week, a prosecuting lawyer involved in the case stated that 3 men have been charged with stealing Maurizio Cattelan's America of 2016, the approximately $6.1 million fully operational 18-karat gold cast toilet artwork. It was taken from Guggenheim Palace, the family home of Winston Churchill, back in 2019. As the footage shows, the thieves dismantled the working 103-kilogram or 227-pound toilet in only 5 minutes from its featured spot in the guides' bathrooms as part of an exhibition of the artist's work. Visitors had been allowed to book time slots to use the toilet while the exhibition was showing, and at the time it happened, in 2019, Cattelan told the New York Times he thought the heist was a prank. He wrote, quote, America was the 1% for the 99%, and I hope it still is. I want to be positive and think the robbery is a kind of Robin Hood-inspired action, end quote. The Guggenheim Museum famously offered to loan America to the Donald Trump White House in 2018 after the president requested to borrow a Vincent van Gogh painting. Unfortunately, the toilet has more than likely been destroyed, and now the charges are being announced. The footage of the theft played out on screen in the long-awaited trial for 3 of the 5 men believed to be involved in the heist. One unnamed man involved with the crime previously pleaded guilty to burglary, but the others include Michael Jones, charged with 1 count of burglary, and pleading not guilty, Fred Doe and Bora Gukuk, who both denied their charges of 1 count of conspiracy to transfer criminal property each, and James Sheen, a builder who employed Jones and previously pleaded guilty to burglary. More to come on this headline as the trial proceeds. A somewhat unexpected headline from last week, 2 paintings have served as evidence in an alleged French corruption case. The art newspaper reported last week that Claude Goyant, an aide to former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, has been accused of attempting to cover up a 500,000 euro or over 523 US thousand bribe from the late Libyan leader Muammar el-Gaddafi through fake art sales. As he also served as Sarkozy's interior minister at one point, Goyant also faces accusations of negotiating alleged bribery between Sarkozy and Gaddafi. The former aide, of course, denied all wrongdoing, claimed instead the cash in question was raised by selling 2 landscape paintings by Flemish artist Andries van Eervel, but prosecutors have presented compelling evidence in an effort to prove that Christie's sold the 2 artworks for less than 20,000 euros back in 1990 instead. The headline caught our attention because it seems to be a big blow to Sarkozy, who is already on trial refuting accusations that he benefited from as much as 50 million euros or 52 million US in illegal Libyan government financing to underwrite his 2007 electoral campaign. We also heard last week that Jeff Koons has won his lawsuit over his Made in Heaven series. U.S. District Judge Timothy Reif has dismissed a lawsuit first filed in 2010 in New York's Southern Southern District Court but actively pursued as of 2021, which accused the American artist of infringing on the copyrights of set designer Michael A. Hayden, who in the past worked with Coons' ex-wife and Italian parliament member / occasional performer Ilona Staller. Hayden says Coons copied his sets, props, and other works in the sexually explicit series Made in Heaven, which also stars Staller. But Judge Reif decided that Hayden waited too long to sue Coons as the works were made over 30 years prior. The claim was therefore time barred. He wrote in his ruling, quote, "A reasonably diligent person in the plaintiff's position should have discovered the alleged infringement prior to 2019, end quote, especially because of the series' showing at the 1990 Venice Biennale." Also last week, the Orlando Museum of Art and the family of its ex-director have agreed to drop their respective lawsuits. This marks the end of a years-long legal dispute over the infamous suite of fake Jean-Michel Basquiat paintings which appeared in exhibition there. Former museum director and CEO Aaron DeGroft died last month due to a brief illness after his leadership of the Orlando Museum of Art was cut short by board decision days after the 2022 FBI raid of the show Heroes and Monsters, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and the later reveal of an FBI affidavit that named him as a key figure in an art fraud investigation. Although DeGroft had passed, litigation continued till now due to Florida's survival statute, which permits a family member to take over a lawsuit after the death of the plaintiff. However, representatives from each side told the publication The Sentinel last week that, quote, "the parties did not think it prudent or cost-effective to continue with this litigation," end quote. Owners of the fake paintings are still seeking a $20 million insurance payout over the FBI seizure, but the companies involved are pursuing court rulings to dismiss those claims. What a shock. The fascinating point on responsibility here is that the Orlando Museum of Art will not be held liable financially for anything, even though it's named in the suit as the technical holder of the insurance policies on the artworks. A couple of obituaries from this last week. The first for Martha Gorman Schultz, an influential Dene weaver who died at 93. I apologize in advance for my pronunciation here. I was not able to find a guide online, but she was of the Tabaha or Water's Edge clan on her maternal side and born for the Todich-i-Ni or Bitter Water clan on her paternal side. Gorman Schultz was known for her mastery and evolution of several traditional patterns throughout her lifelong practice of weaving on the Navajo loom, and her legacy lives on today through the works of her daughter, Lola Cody, and her granddaughter, practicing contemporary artist Melissa Cody. Our second is for Richard Flood, longtime New Museum curator who passed at age 81 on Sunday, February 16th. The museum itself announced his death. We received word from the Peruvian Ministry of Culture last week that a suspect has caused irreversible and visible damage to a historic 6-ton Inca stone in Cusco's historic center. Known as the 12-angled stone, it is a marvel of Inca architecture and a tourist attraction near Cusco's Plaza de Armas. The suspect carved chunks out of it, and it's unclear whether they were apprehended. This is your not-so-friendly reminder from me. Stop messing up historical monuments, please. Thank you. And that is what I have for you this week, honeys. Hope you've enjoyed. Hope you found something to focus in on and follow up on. It is more important than ever that we speak up for the things that matter to us. I hope you have a wonderful week. Hydrate or dihydrate, take care, and all that good stuff. We will talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.